Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the latest in our series of congressional conversations. My name is Akash Chougule. I'm the Vice President of Americans for Prosperity, and we are thrilled to be joined today by Congressman Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania. He is somebody who has obviously championed our issues and our stances throughout his time in Congress, somebody that I actually had a lot of experience working with when I was a staffer on the Education and Labor Committee a few years back, and he was fantastic there as well. But we're very excited to hear from him. There's obviously a ton going on this year that has really affected Americans in their pocketbooks, and we want to hear his perspective, not just as a member of Congress, but also his background as a business owner who has faced some of these issues before in the private sector. So, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, you've now been in Congress for a few years. We're obviously facing an inflation crisis that we haven't seen in 40 years. So before we really dive into the details, I mean, how has it felt different knowing that, your constituents are facing these huge price hikes at the gas station, the grocery store, all this all year long, and yet all Washington seemed to be doing all year was making it worse, debating and then passing these huge spending packages after spending packages. How has that been throughout this year?
Yeah, so and as you had mentioned, my background is business. I ran a regional construction company for 25 years and saw the impact of government policies, government regulation, government economic policies, and saw how that can really impact business owners and jobs as well. And so it's incredibly frustrating to me to see how the policies of this administration have impacted people in the district that I represent. I mean, people are worried. I have people telling me that they're deciding each week whether they can put food on the table or put gas in their car. Many people I talk to have delayed retirement. They've seen the impact on their 401ks. They're seeing the everything they're buying, prices are up dramatically. And so they're delaying retirement by years. I was even talking to one person just a few weeks ago who had been retired for 10 years, but came back to work, took a job at a local foundry just to make ends meet. So it's very, very frustrating. And it didn't have to be this way. And in fact, coming out of COVID, I think the administration, the Democrats in Congress, all of us could have. We had a great example of a recent time when economic policies worked very, very well, and it was after we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You saw for the first time people in my district were they had more in their pockets because we were. The average American household had about a 20% decrease in their tax bill. And then at the same time, wages were going up. And this was for the first time in about a decade. Wages were going up about $6,000 per household. And so what's amazing to me when we have the debates in Congress on the Ways and Means Committee or on the Budget Committee, is that, again, as I said, it's this very recent example compared to what's happening now. And yet it seems like the Biden administration doesn't see that or doesn't care. It's, for me, the rising prices are, it's a classic economic formula. They increased demand by putting trillions of dollars into the economy. And this is not money that we had. This is money that was printed. It was expanding the money supply. So increased demand. And then at the same time, from day one, Joe Biden curtailed the development of energy and the production of energy here in the US. And so restricting supply at the same time you're increasing demand, that prices go up as a result of that. And so we predicted that when they passed the American Rescue Plan. We predicted it in subsequent bills after that when they continued to spend money. We're now up to a price tag of about $10 trillion in additional spending from this administration. It's unbelievable. And so we not only did we predict it, our economists, but also Democrat economists were predicting that this is what would happen. Larry Summers, who was Treasury Secretary during the Clinton administration, predicted before, he called the American Rescue Plan the worst macroeconomic decision in 40 years. And he predicted before it was passed that we would be seeing double-digit inflation about a year later, which is exactly what happened. So it's sad to see. We see the impact every day on people all around us, all across the district and across the country. And we could change it, but we have to make the right decisions going forward.
Absolutely. And what do you make of the way the president and the White House have handled this? I mean, on one hand, they're blaming inflation on the war in Ukraine, which obviously has worsened things, but inflation started long before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And then they turn around and they're saying, you know, it's actually Republicans that are going to make inflation worse, or hey, at least your Social Security check got bigger because of inflation. And so they don't really seem to have any clue of how to handle this. Just, you know, yesterday or 2 days ago, the president said that, you know, he is going to try to levy a tax on energy companies if they don't invest more in energy development. And this comes, as you mentioned, after 2 years of trying to tamp down on traditional energy through regulations, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, what have you. So what do you make of the administration's response, and how is that being received back in your district?
Well, a few responses to things that you said. One, I've heard that as well, that, you know, we're seeing inflation in Europe. And so, you know, there's nothing that we've done that has increased inflation, which is just wrong. America leads the world. America's economy affects the world. And if you look at a graph of inflation in each country, it's clear that America led the way. And it was, again, as I said, a direct result of the policies that were implemented. That's not to say that energy supply across the world didn't impact Europe. It's not to say that even COVID and supply chain issues didn't. There's certainly impact from these policies, but by far the biggest impact was this massive spending spree that this administration has been on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think one of the things that we may not see every day when we're driving down the road, of course, we see the price of gas, right? It's up there in huge numbers. It's hard to miss every day. We drive down the road or take our kids to school or what have you. But one of the things you have experience with, as you mentioned, is kind of those secondary and tertiary costs on business that are then passed down to consumers. And so just given your background in construction, but also what you're hearing from employers in your district and your state across the country, what are some of the ways that this administration's policies, both on the energy side and the spending side, have made it harder to do business, and how is that impacting the average family?
So I've talked to many business owners across the district over the past year, particularly over the past few months, and they've seen prices in some cases for their raw goods double and triple. We're currently at an 8.2% inflation rate for consumer goods, the most common measure that we look at, the CPI of those goods. But business costs are a lot higher than that. Their inflation, their rising prices are a lot higher. And then wages are really impacting. You know, the policies of this administration essentially incentivize people to stay home in many cases rather than go back to work. Now, those policies, some of them are no longer in place, like, for instance, the federal unemployment. However, people haven't come back. We still don't have the participation rate that we had prior to COVID. And I think it is because of those policies that have encouraged people to stay home. And so at the same time as you're seeing prices go up for fuel and everything else, wages are rising pretty dramatically as well. Now, it's good for employees, you would think, but inflation is far outpacing it. And so the problem right now is we're in sort of a wage price spiral where employees are demanding more wages because they need to spend more on goods. That's a cost that drives costs up for businesses. So the cost of producing goods, because of wages, because of the supplies, are all increasing. And so it's very, very hard to get out of that spiral. And that's the situation we're in right now. Our economists were talking about that a year ago, concerned about being there. You're now seeing another impact is what the Fed is doing to try to tame inflation. And I think they have to do this because we can't let inflation continue to spiral out of control. But they're raising interest rates, and you're seeing another interest rate hike today. And so that is raising the cost of capital as well, the cost of a mortgage. So every time you're seeing interest rates go up, less people are able to afford a home, and rents are going up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, there's impacts that we're feeling today with costs at the grocery store, at the gas station. Businesses are facing costs that are going to be passed on to consumers when goods come to market. But then even choices that consumers are making when it comes to credit card debt and their ability to buy homes and things like that, there are a number of impacts from these bad policies that we might not have even gotten to yet. And so when you have these conversations back in your district, especially right now, people are paying closer attention to politics as the election years and all of that. I mean, do you feel like people are grasping kind of what has driven these bad outcomes, that it is overspending and it's overregulation, or is there a little bit of confusion? How much do you feel like your constituents have grasped that policies, and specifically overspending and overregulation, are to blame for the situation that we're in?
Sure. So my constituents, they look at the rising prices, and then they look at other crises like what happened in Afghanistan, like our diminished standing across the world. They look at crime in our streets. They don't feel safe. They look at the crisis at the border, and they believe they cannot afford the policies of this president any longer. They can't afford to have these policies of Nancy Pelosi and Democrats in Congress. They want change, and I think there's a real connection in their minds between the policies of this administration and what they're feeling every day.
Absolutely. And then just, knowing that you're in Pennsylvania, I mean, you all have energy underfoot there in the state. Is there a particular level of frustration knowing that energy obviously is such a vital resource, not just for American families and businesses, our allies abroad, and it's such a sort of hot geopolitical topic, yet all this administration can do is discourage development of American energy, drain the strategic reserve, and then go and ask countries like Venezuela and Iran to increase their development, putting us obviously in a precarious situation. Coming from an energy state like Pennsylvania, what has been the reaction specifically to this administration's energy policies and the way that it's handled that situation on the world stage?
People in Pennsylvania want to go to work producing energy. Companies want to do business here. They're faced with a regulatory environment that makes it difficult to do that. They're faced with long permitting processes. We want to cut that in half, by the way. They're faced with difficulty securing new leases on federal property. Pennsylvania could be the economic engine for the country and could be the engine that leads us to energy independence. We produce energy more cleanly than other countries. And so it's particularly frustrating to Pennsylvanians when you see the president fly around the world to try to convince people who are not always our allies to produce dirtier energy and essentially beg them to produce. He could have flown right here to Pennsylvania, ask energy companies what we can do, what the federal government could do to improve the permitting process and reduce regulation, to unleash what we have and unleash our resources that we have right here in Pennsylvania and across the country as well. So it's very, very frustrating when we know that opportunity is available for us, and instead we're begging foreign countries for oil and gas.
Absolutely. So, I mean, as we look ahead, you ticked off a few of the areas where this administration's policies have caused concern and consternation back in your district. As we look ahead to next year and the next Congress, what are some of the priorities that you want to address that you think are the most important things that Congress must do to set the country on a better path forward?
Well, we want an economy that is strong, that is working for the American people. We want to drive down the cost of goods to reduce inflation, reduce prices. We have a plan to do that. Stop the trillions of dollars in spending and unleash American independence. And then we want the streets that are safe, a nation that is safe, a border that's secure. We want people to be able to walk in the streets at night or at any time feeling safe while they can do that. when they can do that. We want a future based on freedom. We think parents should be able to participate in their child's education, make decisions about their child's education without being called terrorists, by the way. And then we want to hold this government accountable. A core function, a key function of Congress is oversight. We have a lot of questions asked of this administration about what happened in Afghanistan leading up to the disaster there. Don't we want to know what happened there so that we can prevent it from happening again? We want to talk about the causes of inflation so that we can put us on the right path. We have a lot of questions, again, as I said, for the administration. And then the one thing that we haven't talked about is one of the things that I'm thinking about and concerned about, and that is the now $31 trillion in debt and projected to grow at over $1 trillion per year for as far as you can see. That is not a sustainable path. Our budget process, the way we spend taxpayer dollars in Congress is completely broken. It's a terrible process. We have, I don't know if you know this, but we have passed an average of 5 CRs, a continuing resolution, which is a short-term spending, average of 5 per year for each of the last 20 years. This is the way that the best country in the face of the earth is handling its finances. It's terrible. It's not sustainable. It will lead to some sort of economic impact that will, we're already mortgaging our kids and our grandkids' future, but we're putting them in a precarious situation. We can still solve it if we cut back on the spending, if we implement pro-growth policies. I'd love the 118th Congress to be the one that begins to set us on the right path, that changes the trajectory that we're on. Right now, it's as far as that debt's going to continue to go up. It took us a while to get out of this, but we could. So it's going to take a while or it took us a while to get here, I should say. So it's going to take us a while to get out of it, but we can do it. We can start. And so it's one of the things that maybe we aren't talking about much. It's not slapping us in the face, but it will soon if we don't do something about it. And if we get serious about fixing our debt problem, fixing our budget process, we can put the country on the right course.
Absolutely. And I'm very glad you brought that up. That's something Americans for Prosperity has been working on for quite a while, is these budget process reforms. There are obviously, very real spending fights and specific legislation that we've taken on. Your office has worked with us, obviously, against some of these specific spending packages, but the processes themselves are clearly broken, and it's facilitating a lot of this overspending. Some of that stuff can get very confusing and very in the weeds, but obviously vitally important. And that leads me to my next question, which is engagement. Obviously, we have thousands of people that view these conversations, millions that engage with us across the country. We're obviously a grassroots organization. You may have seen that throughout this summer, we were visiting gas stations and grocery stores across the country, helping pay down the price and sort of make up for that difference of inflation. One, to help people, but also help make that connection, get them engaged, get them involved. And so both this year when you've been in the minority and then next year when you may be in a position to try to go on offense, what role do you see grassroots playing, activism playing in sort of regular folks contacting their lawmakers, letting them know about how policy is impacting them, and then to be a driver of change and move policy in a better direction? What role does grassroots play as you see it in that process?
Well, I so appreciate the work that you do and that your organization does. We believe that America is an exceptional nation. We believe that the prosperity that we've seen in America, which is unprecedented, lifted more people out of poverty than at any other time in human history, was not by accident or by mistake. It was because of the principles that this country was founded on, of the principles of freedom, the economic principles of free enterprise and capitalism. May not be a perfect system, but it is the best system in the world. And we have to continue. One of the things that I want us to do is pass a budget that refocuses on those priorities and contrasts with the policies of this administration that really are a slide to socialism. I think the majority of the American people, certainly folks who are part of your organization, are with us in wanting to protect that way of life, because we believe it's the most moral system. We believe it's the best system to help people. We think it's the most compassionate system. And all I would say is it is important for people to speak up, for people to engage. If we're not doing that, then we're leaving it to someone else. And so, as I said, people involved in your organization, you're a strong voice for free enterprise, for prosperity. And that's critical that we continue to see that going forward.
Absolutely. Well, we so appreciate your efforts. And, as we wrap up here, you're home in the district, and Pennsylvania is a great place to be this time of year. Any fall traditions you're particularly fond of as we get into really, I think, the peak of fall, early November here? Anything that you're specifically enjoying being back home this time of year?
Well, fall is actually one of my favorite times of year. And if you drive the streets right now, it's just beautiful. You see the changing leaves, and so it's always great to see that. We just came through Halloween, but then Thanksgiving is a wonderful time to have your family back together and be thankful for everything that we have, and thankful for this great country that we live in. So yeah, it's a great time, and always like the Thanksgiving season.
Awesome. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something we're all fond of as well. Well, Congressman Smucker, again, thank you so much for joining us. We've enjoyed working with you and your staff, defending our values. We look forward to moving the ball forward next year. And like you said, reaffirming those principles that have lifted up, hundreds of millions of people around the world, in this country, making sure that our economy is strong and vibrant. You've been a great partner in doing so, and we so appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you. Great talking with you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.